Hello, everyone, and welcome to another glorious week in the service of the things we did not sign up for. I didn't sign up for you. Carrie, how are you?
I'm doing well, Tim. How are you?
I'm doing pretty well.
Good.
I am doing pretty well. What are we talking about?
Well, tonight I have a very philosophical topic, I like to think, as if, I guess most of our topics are, but I want to talk about the ego versus the soul, because the way that I envision it, if I sit down and I think about it, I think about the voices in our heads, right? So we have the ego-driven persona and we have the soul-driven, and often there is a big debate going on in our heads as to which one to listen to or which one makes more sense. And sometimes the ego wins and sometimes the soul wins. But, as I think through this and I think about the philosophical side, is we are searching for the evolution of our soul to where the soul is the primary thought or the primary voice. And the majority of us are not there. I can honestly say that I am letting my ego win, probably more often than my soul in business, right? Because it's the competition, it's the drive to succeed, and there's in some of the research I did prior to this discussion, I don't think I'm doing quite as bad as maybe I might perceive, but ultimately we've got two voices in our heads. We've got the ego and the soul, and I want to talk about it tonight.
Okay, excellent. How do you tell the difference?
Well, there are different drivers, right? So if you think about the soul, the compassion, the kindness, the long journey that we go through in life. So it's not about the win, it's about the journey. It's about the we mentality, where the ego is about the me mentality. And so I think that that's probably a good way to put it, a good way to look at it.
Okay, but how do you apply a metric to that? It's just, I'm like, is your soul voice telling you that you're listening too much to your ego voice? Like, how, as a single person, how do you tell the difference?
If I look at ego-driven people, they are the people that are absolutely difficult to deal with. So I guess your return on investment as to which you listen to more is it can probably be shown in the relationships that you have with people. If you have
that's interesting.
Yeah, if you have, I just made that up. So yeah.
Look at you.
I am a genius. No, if you, see, that was ego driven. Damn it.
That's it.
No, if you, here's the thing. If you are striving to listen to your soul voice more than your ego voice, I would venture to say that you're doing better than most. And the relationships that you have with people are a direct indication of which voice you're listening to. So if you struggle in your relationships and you have the mentality of, I can't believe they're doing this to me. I can't believe they're not listening to me. I can't believe they're mad at me, angry at me, not playing fair with me, whatever, the me is a pretty good indicator that you're thinking with your ego voice.
Okay.
If you get into relationships with people and you say, we're really struggling, we're not hitting our mark, we need to do better, we need to figure this out, we need to talk through this, we are on the same team. So I would venture to say that it's the difference in we and me, and the approach that you're taking is going to indicate which voice you're listening to more.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, I like the sound of that. That actually it correlates quite well with some of the studies that I've undertaken over the years here and there. But I do remember reading a piece, who, of course, I could not begin to attribute fairly, so I'll just pretend that I wrote it.
You mean we wrote it? See, soul voice.
Sorry. Oh, my ego voice got through again. My ego voice is talking. I mean to say that, of course, we wrote it, you and me. Screw them. no, but there's just this piece that talks about the difference between autonomy and sort of this collective soul, right? It goes back to is it Jung? Carl Jung, I want to say. He talked a little bit about the collective unconscious and how everything exists sort of in this ethereal world that we have a difficult time understanding, let alone describing, and that we're all essentially connected, right? Mm-hmm. It goes back to some of the Buddhist principles and Hindu principles of karmic law and karmic retribution and not being able to really hurt someone else without actually hurting yourself. And because if you're listening to that, it's kind of frou-frou, but the soul voice, then you are essentially listening to a voice that is a part of a chorus of voices.
Okay.
And, oh God, I'm starting to sound like a freaking hippie communist.
You've been out on the ranch too long.
No doubt, apparently. Let's just grow flowers and anyway, I don't know why my communists always sound effeminate. It's because I have I don't know. I'm revealing who I am on my podcast or our podcast. Sorry,
yeah, whoa.
Voice.
For the rest of this podcast, we're gonna just have this little whisper that's like, "That was your ego voice."
Seriously. If you really think about it, we use the very autonomous "I'm alone, me against the world, everybody's out to get me" voice a lot. Mm-hmm. That is the sort of in layman's terms, a quintessential description of the ego. You're this highly autonomous, highly individualized creature that does not rely upon anyone or everyone else. And so we tell ourselves these things that are just not really healthy for us in the interest of being disconnected, disassociated with others. And if you think about it in really strictly logical terms, it's pretty weird. It's pretty weird that we do it and that's overwhelmingly the norm, right?
Right.
Most people are doing this all the time. As I just stare out my window and think about it, people are doing this all the time. I don't know. I remember a conversation that I had with Kevin years ago. And I was trying to describe for him some of these philosophical principles that I was learning about in whatever institution of learning I happened to be engaged in at the time. And heaven knows there's been a few. But hey, I'm preaching to the choir. Anyway, it's weird. It's totally off topic, but just learners love to learn. What is that? I can't.
It's wonderful. No, I get it.
It is, I guess, but I just cannot put it down. I just have to have the next person's perspective and opinion and the next person's perspective and opinion and who wrote what about what and what were they thinking and what drugs were they doing and just all kinds of stuff that I cannot stop searching. It's obsessive. Anyway, the conversation that I was having with Kevin had something to do with the notion of two brain cells sitting side by side, thinking that they are the only brain cell, thinking that they're autonomous at very least. And so the synaptic response, one brain cell to another, representing conversation between two human beings, and each of those human beings is quite sure that they are formulating their own thoughts independent of anything and everything else, and that they're just having a conversation with a completely different autonomous human being. But it's really not the truth. If you really dig into it, it gets pretty frou-frou. It gets pretty hippie, commune, love, and peace and happiness, right? Really quickly, if you're open to the notion. And of course, a lot of people aren't, right? Dick Cheney. A lot of people are really closed off.
Ego voice.
Ego voice. Stop it. I will judge Dick Cheney. Nevertheless, a lot of people are really closed off to the notion that we could be connected on a deeper, dare I say, spiritual level. And because of that, we're very quick to turn this into more of a competition than a collaboration. When all of the successful people in the world succeed by virtue of their capacity to collaborate. I don't know. I've often heard it said, because I spent a lot of time in the world of business, big business, businessmen, business, right?
All the ego business.
Yeah, but that's the funny part, right?
Yeah.
Because it's the same thing, it's the same conversation that I've had with you over the years, which is to say all coaching is life coaching.
Right.
All of it, right?
Right.
I have coached guys on anything from marketing plans to HR concerns, how to develop a sales team, sales process, how to trade stocks and options, how to trade currencies, how to, there's all of these wide array of subjects. And without fail, we will sit down because we need to get together and have another conversation about where that individual is and where they're going and where they're hoping to be. And we spend about 5 minutes on, so how's your portfolio looking? Pretty good. Yeah. How about that first solar? Man, that was crazy. Yeah. No, I made a little bit of money on that. Okay, great. So, what do we want to talk about today? Man, my wife and my kids just don't respect me. Right.
Right.
And then we're just like into this completely other world of, it becomes life coaching. It just is.
Right.
It just is. All coaching is life coaching. The kids out there coaching baseball players, right? And it has precious little to do with your capacity to throw a ball or your capacity to keep your eyes on a ball and swing a bat at it. And a lot more to do with, do you deserve to strike this guy out? Do you want to get a hit? Are you worthy of getting a hit? It's really, really weird. It has a lot to do with how we feel about ourselves. Because if it really just came down to coaching the mechanics, absolutely anybody could do it. But they can't. If you look at professional sports, across the spectrum, not everybody, precious few people can take a cut at that ball and actually make contact. And so if you figure that arms and legs are the same, elbows and knees are the same, largely, then why can't everybody just excel at a given sport, whatever it is? And it boils down to how you think about yourself. So I'm kind of off in the weeds, but
yeah, I think you make a good point. Because your soul's voice is going to be accepting of who you are and actually build on the strengths that you have, where your ego voice might live in a space that's more anxious or more mistrusting or feels shameful that you don't have that skill set. So there's a complete mentality. What's the word I'm looking for? There's a complete mental polarity in the
Right.
ego and the soul, right? So on one side, you have the ego is what, when your soul tells you it's time to get out of the game, the ego is like, no, I'm just going to rack my body getting this game done. Right. And so there's a difference. There's an intuition. So I would even venture to say that your soul houses your intuition, your gut reaction, your instinctual side, where your ego, and I don't want to say it's the difference in emotion and logic, because that's not fair to emotion or fair to logic, because we need both of them. But your ego very much will seek to control the outcome of things, or has to have, have you ever met with somebody that's they're so ego driven that they just have to have all of the answers, and they're debating with you. So they make it this big debate because it's an attempt to control the conversation or the energetic interaction that takes place. Whereas someone who, like, when I think of a soul-driven person, I think of like Gandhi, or I think of the Dalai Lama. or, Ezra Taft Benson or whomever, like somebody who kind of personifies that charitable, kind, I'm going to shake your hand and pat your shoulder and really care about how you're doing today.
Right.
Where the streets are full of men going to and fro for work every day who are pushing you out of the way because they got to get there. They got to get this done. And so I guess if I was to personify the ego and the soul, it would be the Dalai Lama versus the arrogant businessman that drives by you in the Corvette and like pushes you off the road because you're in their way.
Right.
No offense to businessmen or Corvettes. They're both lovely. But it's just, it's one of those things where I think that now here's something that I read that I find interesting. Your ego wants love, and then your soul, it wants to give love or is love. Now, I think we should spend a little time on that because that was a little bit confusing to me. I haven't quite processed it because
Okay.
I would think that we all want love. Right? We don't want to control love. Like we want love. Love should be given freely. But why would your ego want love and your soul be love?
Okay.
Is that saying that there is a complete fulfillment in the soul voice where the ego is reaching out for more, like give me everything?
I don't know. I mean, I think the notion that the ego is seeking to be loved, right? And then working toward that goal through whatever means.
And that's where, okay, so I see what you're saying. So working towards that goal, in other words, I want love. And in order to get it, instead of just letting it be love, I might try to control it.
Right.
So that actually puts the relationship hat on an ego-driven nightmare.
Right. Well,
right?
Because like what I've seen relative to people who I would consider very ego-driven,
mm-hmm.
and not to say that I haven't been that person. I've seen that person in the mirror, on and off all my life.
Sure.
I mean, I will get into these phases where I'm trying to manage everything and manipulate everything and control everything. And then I realize that is principally born out of a lack of faith and a lack of self-confidence. Confidence in myself to affect a positive change in my own life, as well as a lack of faith in the process in general, be that God or the universe or whatever people call it, right? There seems to be this mysterious ethereal force that has some creative driving force in whatever's going on, right? And that's a conversation for just like, that's a weekend retreat. That's a week-long retreat, right? Because there's so much information there to consider. And no offense to the atheist out there, whom I just don't happen to be one. I can't tell you exactly what's going on, but I'm pretty sure that there's something going on here, right? That we completely and thoroughly don't understand. And if you're really willing to look at a couple of things, number one, the physics of it, and number two, just the mathematics. Now, you would think that physics and math were reserved for the hard-line, hard-nosed, hard-minded, autonomous, egotistical, atheistic type person. But it's really not. If you dig into the math and you dig into the physics, you will see, certainly to my satisfaction, I have seen that there is no way that we are the most advanced creatures in the universe. I just don't believe that, right? But that's what it requires. That's what it requires. It's really interesting because there are so many people out there that are very reticent to believe in a divine creation, but they're eager and willing to believe that aliens did it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't see how you differentiate between those two things. Like, I'm not saying what God is. I'm not hanging a label on it. I'm just saying that there is something dramatically more intelligent at play here than we are certainly at present. And to back out and say that that cannot be a thing, and to try to differentiate between spirituality and science is a bit of a fool's errand. Like you just, by definition, you don't know something until you know it. And so to sit there and arrogantly, obstinately say, I believe in the scientific whatever, but there absolutely cannot be any force more intelligent than me that created all this, I think is disingenuous at best.
Yeah, I agree.
So when I back up and look at that egotistical voice versus that soul voice, I'm actually reminded of working with a group of young men some years back. And these guys were, all like 16 to 18 and just coming into sort of dating age and having so many conversations with these young men. And I would ask them, how are you approaching your relationships with these other people, with these young women? And almost without fail, they would tell me that they could have basically any girl in the group that they wanted if they only had one thing that most of them were missing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, think like a 16 to 18-year-old boy and tell me if you can guess what the one thing they were missing is.
A car.
That is exactly right. 100%.
Ding, ding, ding. I won.
Because it has because, we all know after years on Earth that all women are incredibly materialistic, right?
Yeah, of course. All we want is a nice ride.
They don't care about anything. You don't have to be able to carry on a conversation.
Flowers, forget flowers.
Kindness. Intimate connection of any kind is wildly overrated. But I'm telling you what, if you have a sweet ride, maybe it's a truck or better yet, like a convertible.
Mm-hmm.
Ooh, you can write your own ticket, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I would have these conversations with these young men and try to help them to see how incredibly short-sighted, dare I say, buffoonish that opinion really is. You don't need the fancy red car, dude. It has nothing to do with that. It has absolutely nothing to do with that. It has to do with you being exactly who you are, being true to yourself, realizing that you are the best you that there will ever be. You are the world's foremost authority on what you think and how you feel. And when it boils right down to it, nobody else even gets a vote. You can take a lot of information under advisement, but you make all of your own decisions and you live with them. You're responsible for them. And if you will just do that, I promise you, with that level of self-awareness, self-actualization, that is essentially the catalyst for all self-confidence. Self-confidence is not born out of being the biggest, toughest, baddest, coolest dude. It's born out of knowing exactly who you are. That's the whole secret. That's the whole formula of self-confidence. I know exactly who I am, and I am not afraid to share that with the world because I'm in touch. I'm self-aware. Self-awareness feeds self-confidence. Whereas if you look at it from the perspective of that so-called ego voice, the ego voice is not self-confident. If anything, it's the antithesis. The ego voice is cowardly. The ego voice is fearful, self-absorbed, and it always has to be right. The ego voice is the catalyst for arrogance instead of confidence.
Oh, absolutely.
And so when you sit around afraid that someone is going to take something from you, or heaven forbid that you could have something better in your life if only you had the right car. I don't mean to make fun of these young men. I really
Oh, it's
don't.
cute though. I mean, because while the boys are thinking that all they need is the car, the girls are thinking that they need to find somebody that opens the door for them or brings them a corsage or writes them poetry. Like we're all sitting there watching, Cinderella or Snow White or whatever, waiting for that prince to knock on the door. And none of those princes had a car.
That's right. That's right. There was no car involved.
Nope.
If only I had a noble steed. No, that's exactly right. We are listening to the wrong voice is the problem. We're listening to the wrong voice. Because if you back up and look at that simple example of if I only had the right car or, the right horse and buggy or the right horse or the right oxen, back in the day, if I only had, whatever material possession fills in the blank that allows you to accept yourself for who you are and feel good about who you are to the point that you are willing to share that with any and everyone else, no matter what it means, then you've arrived. Then you get there. It's not about how you get there. It's not about the car you arrive in. It's about the man in the suit who gets out of the car.
Absolutely. And it's interesting because when we're young, we're definitely driven more by the ego voice than the soul voice. And as we get older, the majority of us tend to, that there's a shift there. Right. So, and maybe that's because of the humbling moments that we go through in life, because I will tell you the more humility or the more humbling moments or the more trials that someone goes through, the more depth they have to their character most
Correct.
of the time.
You're right. Matter of fact, there's a comedian that I follow who, once again, I cannot remember his name, but man, this guy is so funny. But he's talking about how his kids will never make it in the NBA. Man, my kids will never make it in the NBA. And the wife is like, why is that? It's like, because I'm always here for them. I'm always taking them to, basketball practice. I'm always paying for the coaching and paying for the doctor's appointments and taking care of their needs and supporting everything they want. But if you look at any great NBA player and you look back on his life, he's just like growing up in the projects and dad hasn't been around in 20 years. And it's like all he's got to do is just play basketball and take out his, anger at the world, on the basketball court. And so you literally, I'm creating too much softness, too much opportunity for my kids, in order for them to really be successful. They've got to have hardship. And how crazy is that? And yet every parent that you ever ask would tell you, yeah, I want to make my child's life easier and better than mine was. But that's the worst thing you can do, apparently.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, think about it this way. When we've all had relationships that were less than wonderful. I don't know anybody that hasn't had a relationship that wasn't just the greatest relationship. And there's the quote about how people come into your life for a season, a reason, or a lifetime or whatever. I butchered that quote. But people come into your life and they're either a blessing or a lesson. And we've all had relationships that were more lesson than blessing.
well, shucks. Honey, I tell you what.
They're more lesson than blessing.
Some folks come into your life and they's more lesson than blessing.
I couldn't help it. The Southern girl.
Come on, how did we get back to South Carolina all of a sudden?
I just had to. I couldn't let it go. I heard it in my head and I had to say it.
You can take the girl out of the South.
Yeah. And she's a blessing.
It'll be a blessing to you.
It'll be a blessing. Y'all have a good day now. So, no, but I just want to let's steer back and finish this point because I think it's important. So when you go through those relationships that are trying, they're humbling. because I mean, I know for me, there are relationships that I've had in my past that I let the ego kick in, and I tried to control the outcome, and it was, wanting that love, wanting that validation because I could not give it to myself. And then as I evolved as a human being and I learned to love myself and I gained that confidence and that different perspective, those lessons were fewer and further between. And then one day I hit a point in my life where I didn't need the lesson anymore. So the lesson went away, and there was an evolution. But how grateful am I that I can be in a relationship that is a blessing because I have learned the hard way, right? I've learned through life's ups and downs and the trying to control it, and your perspective changes. And that's true for everything. And so I'm going to venture to say that your ego voice drives your behaviors when you're younger, but as you go through life and you learn those lessons, your soul voice, and because of the humility that you feel in those rough moments, your soul voice gains strength.
Right. You just mature.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the best definition of maturity I've ever heard.
Good.
You're absolutely right. We mature. We have these, we get these scars on our face, to quote Billy Joel. See, I know that quote.
Mm-hmm.
You have no scars on your face and you cannot handle pressure. But as we age, we get these scars. We have these events, scars on our soul and scars on our body that allow us to just become more mature. Right. And go, yeah, I could flip out and freak out and, get super focused on why I don't have everything I want right in front of me right at this moment. Or I could just back up and learn from my experiences in the past. And that second methodology is profound in the way that it leads to your own happiness, self-awareness, and internal satisfaction.
Right. I think it's the difference in giving energy to the good parts of you, and
right.
Fear, anxiety. I mean, you touched on fear. I've touched on anxiety, being afraid, being anxious, being controlling, having self-doubt, lack of confidence. That's all part of your ego voice.
Right. That's right. That's that old adage about man walks the earth with an angel inside and a demon inside.
Mm-hmm.
And your job is to essentially control the demon. Don't let the demon rule your life, right? And how do you do that? Well, you don't feed it. You starve it to death. It's a war of attrition.
Right.
Just keep feeding the angel. Don't feed the demon. And you will find the happiness you're looking for, which is the ultimate and only barometer, right? I've had so many people talk to me over the years about hopes and dreams and goals and desires and all of that stuff, right? But what it all boils down to is, are you happy? Do you get up in the morning and go, man, this is pretty good. This is pretty good. I read a really interesting quote earlier in the week that talks about, oh gosh, another famous author here. I'm going to butcher this. And I'm not going to give credit for it because I don't remember. I need to start keeping notes on my entire life. I just don't think about it in those terms, right? I read something, it hits me, it inspires me, and then I try to use it to make my life happier, and I push on down the road. But essentially what it said was, I would rather have a tiny piece of earth and see the whole thing than to own the entire earth and see very little of it. And I just think, wow, and of course this was actually a travel blog, travel writer kind of person who made the quote. And so you can see where she is, using the quote. because it applies very efficaciously. That's a word everybody's learned over the last couple of years. It applies well to travel, but it also applies well to the journey of life in general, right? You don't need to own the whole earth to just go out there and see it all and be a part of it and enjoy it. But you can own the whole earth. Oftentimes you're going to do that from behind a desk, and you're never really going to see much of it at all. And so,
Yeah.
I don't know. I think ultimately for me, when I think about that ego-driven voice, the ego-driven voice is incredibly concerned with what other people think. Or to be more accurate, what they think other people think. Because I always go back to my old line, and I know who wrote this one. I did, which is to say, if you're worried about what people think about you, don't, because you would be surprised to learn how infrequently that happens.
Right.
People are not thinking about you. They are not. They're thinking about their spouses, their children, their future, their jobs, their own deadlines. You know,
Mm-hmm.
You remember the whole story where I shaved off a third of my eyebrow and went to work, right?
Mm-hmm.
Nobody noticed. Nobody even noticed, right? And so it's like people are not thinking about you. I imagine those who did notice just went, no, I don't know. He's a weirdo, whatever. They don't care because they're not thinking about me. And people are not thinking about you. But the ego lives in a world where they assume that they have to put on a show, that they have to be somebody for everybody else. They've got to constantly tap dance to the music and be on time and on beat and have the rhythm and all that stuff because people are looking, and they're just really not. They really just are so involved in their own challenges in life that they don't have time to think about you. Whereas that soul voice is worried about what you think, not what about everybody else thinks. I worry about what I think when I'm listening to that soul voice,
Mm-hmm.
I'm observing myself. Now this I think was Friedrich Nietzsche when he talked about how it's probably some ancient Indian proverb. Never mind. Somebody once said, a wise man once said, that there are three great mysteries in life. To the fish, it's the water. To the bird, it's the air. And to man, it is his mind or himself, right?
Mm-hmm.
Those are the three great mysteries. And we spend most of our time mysteriously poking around inside the brain, which houses the mind, which is a different thing. Don't confuse your brain with your mind. And we poke around and try to figure out what it's all about and what it means to us and what we want, how to get it, why we want it, all of that stuff. And so that's the real magic, is to ask yourself what you think about things as opposed to worrying about, whether Sally is worried that you have a car or not, because it's really just not about that.
Absolutely. It reminds me of the Shel Silverstein book, The Missing Piece Meets the Big O. And it's great books, right? If you've never, The Giving Tree, Missing Piece Meets the Big O. But it's all about the evolution of moving from a missing piece to something complete. And the soul will allow you and actually cultivate that completion, where the ego there will always be a void. There will always be a missing piece because the ego is never completely satisfied. So it could just be, to remove the ego completely and have just your soul voice would equate to Jesus level perfection. Right. And the truth is that the chances of any of us truly obtaining that in this lifetime It's not likely. Maybe a few
No.
people will, and I will most likely not be one of them because I have the I have the internal struggle in me, um, because of being human, right? And I embrace
Well,
that.
and let's be honest, you'd have to give up driving entirely.
I would. I would never be able to leave my house again.
Just
So
no more
that's
driving. We'll put a mask on, you sit you in the back seat, have some of
play
those soundproof windows, play some music and headphones.
meditation music or like audiobooks by Eckhart
Right.
Tolle,
There you
something
go.
something
That's
like
it.
that. No,
That's it.
and that's fine. I mean, but here is my philosophy on the ego versus the soul. We will never truly remove the ego voice, but the goal in life is to move through the ego voice to build and uplift our soul voice. And that is the progression that we should aspire to, that I should
Okay.
aspire to. And so, although it may sound idealistic, overly optimistic, however, whatever istic you want to put on it, if you allow an imbalance between the ego and the soul, and the ego is winning that fight, you will live in a space of anxiousness and stress and the need to control and the need to fulfill something that you just ultimately you can't, like when you're craving something, you're like, I really want something to eat, but I just can't put my finger on it. Like, what do I want for dinner? What do I want to eat? That's how I envision the ego voice. Like, oh, I just need more, but what is that more?
Right. Right. As opposed to just being happy, just
Being
being
good.
content.
Look at all the great things I have.
Yeah, and that opens a whole other area, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because there is a lot of evidence, both philosophical and spiritual and even scientific, to suggest that graciousness, or simply being grateful for what you have, opens the door to so much more in your life,
Mm-hmm.
I was actually having this conversation just the other day with an individual who shall go unnamed. But nevertheless, I'm talking about how the power of getting what you want out of life, right? And begrudgingly, after just decades in the field, I have to admit that it is absolutely not a logical process, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's very easy to think that getting what you want out of life, truly getting what you want out of life, has to do with you sitting down, deciding what that is, making a checklist of all the intricate steps between where you are and where you want to be, and then just check off the boxes one by one until you attain that thing that you want. Unfortunately, it doesn't work. It's just sad. Unfortunately, for all of my studies and all of my reading, it comes back more to intention and visualizing that thing you want and then clothing that thing in your own emotion that leads to you attaining the things that you want. Frou-frou, I know.
It's great, though. I love it.
But
I love it.
I just can't deny it, right? I just can't deny it. And that's after spending years. I mean, you got to understand, I spent, a long time kind of in the other camp, for lack of a better term, a Martian masculine energy camp, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where it wasn't emotional, it wasn't intuitive. It was just, logic, line by line. We will brick by brick. We'll wake up one day and have a mighty mansion. But it's going to take a lot longer to get there than if you do this little thing called, God, I hate to say the word, but manifest.
Oh, yeah.
I
love the word manifest.
So
I love it. I know that but see, there you go. That's the key to it. Manifestation. You find what you look for.
You really do. You really do. And it's not just what you look for, because it's not just logical reasons as to what you look for. Like if you want a house on the beach, then you've got to visualize yourself with your loved ones, the people who are the most meaningful to you in the world, and assimilate those people on the beach in front of your house on the beach and understand why you're there and how powerful that is. And if you can visualize that to the point of tears, you can absolutely create it. And what's weird is that you don't have to check all the boxes or do all that much to create it. You just have to move forward in faith, and this thing will mysteriously manifest.
It will. It absolutely will. You know this about me, and it's when I was little, I would make lists of the type of person, the type of man that I wanted to grow up and meet and fall in love with, right? And somewhere along the lines between, I don't know, 10 and, how old am I now? 46, 10 and 46 years old, I forgot, I forgot what that list was about. And I let my I don't even want to say insecurities, because it wasn't that. I let my need to fulfill a void within myself drive the type of relationships I looked for.
Right.
But I never stopped wanting those things that I identified at a very young age that I wanted in the person that I would spend my life with, right? And then you get to a point where you've exhausted yourself because you're going after the wrong thing. You're trying to make every person that isn't meant to fit with you. And you're right. pushing and pushing and pushing, and you're unhappy. And then you get to a point where you meet someone and they fulfill. Now, so I became a whole person during that time. So I can't discount the lessons that I went through, because I learned more about myself than I ever thought possible. And a lot of it was through tears and through humbling experiences and through really tough times. But you can never outrun yourself. So what you truly want in life, you are always going to truly want in life. And if you focus on that and you get to a point where you just don't try to control it, and you just say, this is what I want. This is the kind of man I'm looking for. And I am 100% okay if I never find him. Well, that's when he pops up. I promise you. I hate it. I hate the story. I hate the whole, I found it when I least expected it. But that's the truth of it. It happens.
But why is that a cliche? Cliches are cliches for a reason.
Right.
You can you can have disdain for it, because it's so cliche, and it's the same thing everybody says, right? But at some point you have to back up and say, does everybody say that because it's true? I mean, could that be the thing? Could it be that they're not just bourgeois and trite and whatever, whatever you want to ascribe to it as far as a way of describing it? Or could it be that that's some weird universal principle that we're dealing with, and that's the reason everybody says it?
Right.
It's gotta be. Anyway, I don't know. It just, by way of wrapping it up, the trick to life, in my estimation, and this is just one guy's ramblings, okay? Mm-hmm. But the path to happiness is not to try to hold back the tide, not to swim against the current. Swim with the current and just see where it takes you, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, we both grew up on the ocean, right? Mm-hmm. So I don't go out there and try to catch fish while the tide's going out.
Right.
I dig for clams. I look for crabs in the crevices. And the shellfish are wonderful and delicious. Guess what? In 4, 5, 6 hours, the tide's rolling in again. And that's when I'm out there fishing. I fish when the tide rolls in. I dig for clams when the tide rolls out. And I don't try to change that fundamental truism about life's experiences as it applies to any and everything else in life.
Right.
Go with the flow, literally. Go with the flow, figuratively. Manifest the things you want. Think about them. Think about them with a great deal of pure emotion. And then back up and see what happens. Be open to it and see what happens.
I like it.
Stop expecting it and just let it flow into your life. And it will. Sound like Louise Hay.
Hey, I love that woman. So you're definitely preaching to the choir on that. I'm like, preach, Louise, preach.
Well, we've been on for a while, and I got to clean my crystals tonight. So.
Oh, me too. Moon bath. I can go with this for hours. You can make fun of me if you want to, but it's okay. I gotta go sprinkle salt. I gotta go sprinkle salt around the perimeter of the property because it's that time of the moon phase. All right.
There you go. All right. Well, in that case, thanks for the conversation. I hope anyone and everyone who might have the opportunity to hear said conversation enjoys it thoroughly. And until we meet again, I'm going to do the lead in here. Dream your life.
And live your dreams.
See, you do that as well as I do, almost. All right. Bye.
Bye-bye.